Ben. And I know Tom is here. Tom is already here waiting in the background. Tom Gentry is with us. So, where are you, Tom? Come on up.
I'm
It's on
here.
mute, Tom. There you are. Thank you, Tom. Good to see you. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you, John?
Good, good. I like your bookshelf. I'm jealous. You look like a
Thank you.
reader.
Yeah, I guess
I
so.
always like seeing a good bookshelf. So, I want to tell you about Tom. Tom is a state and internationally certified addiction counselor. He lives in West Palm Beach, Florida. He spent more than 20 years working with people and families affected by addiction. In addition to helping families find help for their loved ones, he guides men through the terrain between early stages of abstinence and long term recovery. He facilitates groups focused on relationships, codependency, and transition into manhood. Tom himself found recovery as a young adult and is grateful to be breaking the cycle of alcoholism in his family, from which it has suffered for generations. He also produces and hosts The Path to Authenticity, a podcast about being true to oneself. So once again, thank you, Tom. So Tom, we're starting off all the interviews with the same question. Can you share with us one thing that most people don't know about you? Something that you can share in this forum?
Well, I'm the youngest of 8 kids, and I have 5 older sisters, so I feel like that's something that has definitely shaped my life in lots of ways.
For,
How's
for
that?
the for the better, I'm hoping.
Oh, of course, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
We say that. I have three sisters, so yeah, we have to say those things publicly. Always for the better. Thank you. So you're an interventionist. And I know we talked before, and I said you're an interventionist, and you're like, well, I don't know. People don't like that term. So what? Or people have maybe don't like that term, but it's this word that we can have some people can have some baggage or different things that we've heard that we've seen the TV show, and it's like, well, that's not how I do it. That feels manipulative, and it feels kind of yucky doing it that way. I don't do it that way. So, can you tell us how do you describe the work you do, and what's one of the most misunderstood things about the work you do?
Well, I guess I'd start with the work that I do that's most relevant to this. Is I do coaching and consulting with families who have a person of concern who suffers from an addiction. So a lot of times that's with parents or a spouse, and I have some intervention training, but it's what I do with them is kind of everything up to the line of a full fledged intervention where I show up there and fly with the client. I don't do that part. I sort of gauge it in the beginning. And if I feel like it's complicated enough that they need someone, then I'll refer them to someone who I trust.
Okay.
But I think there's a lot that can be done to help families that that without going to that extreme. And
Okay.
I've been in a position for most of my career to take calls from family members and kind of guide them towards getting treatment for their loved ones. And sometimes that involved referring them to an interventionist. But what I usually tried to do is make sure to refer them to someone who I trusted enough to know that they would tell the family if they didn't think they needed to go to that extreme.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what I try to do is, first of all, get the family to stop talking to them about getting help, and let's circle the wagons and come up with the real plan as to how to approach this. And when we approach this, let's know what we're going to do. Where is he or she going to be going to treatment? Let's have everything lined up. And then usually I try to sort of guide the situation to the point where I can ease into a conversation with the person and can generally convince them to go.
So how do you convince someone to go to treatment? We would all love to know the magic there. How do you convince someone?
Well, I think a big part of it um, is kind of setting the table for it before the conversation takes place. Like, for example, if you have a 28-year-old son who's living in your home, I would coach the family into being prepared to tell him if you don't go to treatment, you're going to have to find a new place to live. And where those lines are drawn are different from everyone, but to try to manage the situation where if they have a choice, it's not an attractive alternative that they have.
Yeah.
And so kind of massage it in that way, but also I try to learn enough about them to know what kind of program they would do well in and guide them in that direction. And like sometimes the clients, they may have had treatment several times, but may have never worked on experiences with trauma or mental health issues that
Mm.
so I try to really make sure that they're getting the kind of care that they need, and this isn't going to be just another treatment experience for you.
Mm. So you mentioned, so I like that, to find a treatment center that's in specific and will treat the needs of that person, because not because each there's a lot of treatment centers out there, and I know some of you listening right now, you've been around this. You've been doing this for a long time. Maybe your loved one's been in and out of treatment centers. You know them all. You know the options. But some of you listening, you're just starting and you don't know. But there's a wide variety of treatment centers. They're not that no two are the same. Some will treat concurrent disorders, some won't. Some will deal with trauma, some don't. Some deal with eating disorders, some don't. So it's important to have your loved one assessed to find out what are their needs, and let's find the proper place for them to go. But one thing you mentioned, Tom, was loved ones might need to decide, offer treatment, offer help. If you don't take it, we respect your choice, but you might not be able to live here anymore. Why would a loved one say, you can't live in our home anymore?
Well, they're saying that they're not saying that to the human being that is their child. They're saying that to the illness. At that point in a person's addiction, the illness is operative. It's making the decisions for the person. So and there's a saying that most of the time we don't get better when we see the light, but when we feel the heat.
Hmm.
And I think there's a lot of
So
truth
good.
to that.
So good. Yeah. Hmm. So how can we as loved ones have a role in helping them feel the heat?
Well, I think where I can come in or a professional can come in is to help them sort out the family members, what's going on with them emotionally, kind of get in touch with the distress that they're experiencing, and help them understand that by allowing your son or daughter to continue to live in your home at 28 years old when he or she is perfectly capable of taking care of him or herself, if he or she isn't destroying their life, you don't have to feel bad about expecting them to take care of themselves.
Hmm.
And to the guilt
Okay.
that goes along with this is just incredible. And usually by the time a family reaches out to me or someone like me, the person of concern is knows all the buttons and is pushing all the buttons and playing the guilt card as much as they possibly can.
Hmm. Hmm. So what's one of the tell us a story about one of the a family that you worked with that was just like that was just kind of like made you love your job. Is there something that comes to mind, a difficult situation, and you were able to get through, and how did you get through, and is there something that comes to mind, a story you can share with us?
Yeah. I mean, there are lots of things that come to mind. I think, generally speaking, what is most gratifying to me is when I work with someone who is going through the same sorts of issues in their with their family that I did when I was young. So I feel like I'm uniquely capable to understand them and to just really know how they feel and to be able to connect them in a way that someone else wouldn't be able to. But a couple years ago, I got a call on Christmas Eve from a father, a relatively affluent American family living on the eastern seaboard. And this is the 28-year-old son who was living in one of his parents' houses and basically holding them hostage. And at this point, they had sort of known he'd had a problem for a long time, but he was addicted to opiates and benzodiazepines. And a week before, they had a family Christmas gathering, and he passed out at the table, head face in the plate, you know.
Wow.
So mom and dad started talking to him about getting some help, and of course he's going to quit, and saying all the right things to get them off their back. And then, the next thing you know, this dad's calling me because he heard about me from a family someone from church, I think. And he's practically in tears. But he also understood that he needed help, that he's too close to his son to have any level of objectivity, and that he's in too much pain, that he just needed someone to tell him how to handle this stuff. And so it was a little bit of a rocky process. By about so that was Christmas Eve. By about New Year's Day, I had already spoken to the kid and talked to him about going to a couple different places for residential that I felt like were uniquely suited to him in terms of going somewhere where he could enjoy it and
Right.
feel fed spiritually and emotionally. And so, but he wasn't having it, and he had never had treatment before, and he wanted to try outpatient treatment. So, um, I mean, from an ethical standpoint, if a person has never had treatment, it's reasonable to give them a chance at a lower level of care than residential. And he needed residential treatment, but so that was where we kind of agreed, okay, we'll give it a shot, see how it goes. Well, he couldn't stay clean long enough to even engage in any groups. And this, I mean, it turned into a little bit of a horror story for me, because I placed him an outpatient facility in his community that came highly recommended, and talked to them about, okay, let's create a behavioral contract so that when he uses again, here's the plan. I had the plan for residential treatment, 90 days, all in place.
Yeah.
And they then acted like we never had that conversation and undermined my plan. So then I ended up in a power struggle with the folks at this other facility,
Hmm.
and ultimately got him to detox, got him to a facility where it's sort of an adventure based and 12-step focused program in South Florida that's 90 days. I know the guys who own it and run it personally. I knew that he'd do really well at this facility, and also that they have a good family program. And it also met one of the other criteria that I usually try to meet when I'm placing someone, when I do this kind of work, is that it's somewhere where I know the people will pick up the phone if I call. So if the family has a concern or there's a problem, that I can get somebody on the phone and get a handle on what's going on. But anyway, he went there for 90 days. The parents went through the family program. did great, and I went to his 1 year anniversary celebration a year later, and now
Yeah. Okay.
it's probably 18 months. I talked to the dad yesterday. They were down visiting a few months back. I had lunch with mom and dad, and I mean,
So
their family has changed as a result of this. Their
can
quality of
you
life.
thank you so much. I mean, those are the stories that kind of keep us going. Not all stories are like that. Those are the ones that keep us going. So I love that you shared that. Thank you. Can you talk about um, you mentioned the place that you sent him had a family program. What is a family program? What does that look like? What is it? What happens at a family program? And why is that important for loved ones?
Well, I think the reason why it's important is because it's an illness in a family system. And a lot of times I will tell parents, especially when they're going through this chronic relapse sort of situation, I'll tell them, if you're not going to do anything differently, you can't expect them to change. And unless you're willing to change, they're not going. They're just going to keep acting the way that they are. But if you change, then they will be compelled to change sooner or later on some level. But to me, a family program, aside from giving families a basic education on the illness, I think another key objective is when family members come to a program like this, what they assume is they're going to get all this knowledge and information about how to help the person of concern. When in
Mm,
reality, what they're going to get is how to help themselves.
mm, mm.
What role they're playing in this situation. I mean, codependency can make you physically ill. I
So
mean,
can you define that? We haven't gone really deep in codependency yet. And that's probably a term that a lot of us have heard, and it's one that there's lots of different definitions about. So how do you define the term codependency?
well, and I might forget some of these. You're putting me on the spot a little bit, but the way that I prefer to look at it is, there's a book called Facing Codependence, written by Pia Melody, and she
Yep.
talks about the 5 core symptoms: um, inability to experience one's own reality, inability to experience one's own reality moderately, inability to establish and maintain effective boundaries, um, low self-esteem, and there's another one that I'm forgetting right now, but I'll probably
Yeah,
remember.
no worries.
Yeah,
Yeah, and yeah, like to me, I define codependency in a really base way is you make I need you to make me feel okay.
right.
Without you, I don't feel okay. If are you happy? Okay, then I'm okay. Are you
Yeah,
not? Then I mean, there's that's a really base
right.
definition of codependency. But why is that important to address for loved ones?
Why is that important? Hmm. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of times it's what really makes the difference. I mean, you're talking to a guy who at 23 years old went to residential treatment, and his mom has been in Al-Anon ever since. So,
Ever since. That's amazing. So
ever
why
since.
does she tell me why does she still go? Because I think a lot of people would look at that and be like, "What? Why does she
Uh,
still go?"
well, I mean, I look at this kind of personal growth as, I like the analogy of the onion. It's layer after layer. We just keep unpeeling and going deeper and learning more about ourselves and healing
Mm,
more. But also, my mom, who's 90 years old, grew up in a home where her parents were pretty heavy drinkers. Lots of heavy drinking on both sides of the family. She had an uncle who was clearly an alcoholic, to the extent that he'd been jailed a number of times, and for a
mm,
long time couldn't hold down a job. And then she raised 8 kids, definitely 3 of whom are alcoholics, and probably more. And so she's been around it her entire life, 90 years. So it's unrealistic to think that going to Al Anon meetings for a few weeks is going to affect the kind of change that, Rome wasn't built in a day. And then the other thing is that it's gratifying to her. She can help other people, she can give back. So,
And which is such an important piece, not only for the addicted person to be around and stay in 12-step groups for long term, but also for family to stay around and give back. There's something
yeah.
different that happens in the beginning. Yeah, we need to receive. I need to be built up. I need to be encouraged. Help me, teach me. I don't know what to do. Help me. And then at some point, that I need to now be a conduit where I flow and I help other people.
Well,
There's
and
something that's so yeah. Go ahead.
here's the other thing that, it's about connection. When I drank the way I wanted to feel more connected to certain people, and I was looking for something when I drank the way that I did. And I didn't really find it until I found recovery. And when you enter this world of recovery and you start to connect with other people in such a genuine way that out in the rest of the world people generally avoid, it just it feels good. It feels
Mm-hmm.
good to really connect. And I feel like addiction is the real answer. Connection.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's such a key, isn't it, to
Mm-hmm.
recovery? I mean, it's a key to healthy life, healthy relationships, is to connect on a deep level, not on a surface level, but to really know somebody else and be known by others. We
Mm-hmm.
need connection. Um, I would like to change gears and go and talk about interventions. How do you how do you get the family involved? I think a common question is, I want to do an intervention. Here's something that I can hear. I've heard many times. I want to do an intervention, but nobody else is interested in doing it but me. I'm the only person in the family that wants to do it. What do you do? Do you work with that person, Tom? Would you? What would you say to that person? If it's just the mom or just the dad or just a sibling, nobody else wants to help. I feel like I'm all alone. What do we do?
Well, the work of the interventionist is to get enough people aligned to affect the change. So that's where the work begins really for the interventionist to start getting those people who are resistant on board. And then when the intervention is actually staged, to only have the supportive people in the room,
Hmm,
right?
hmm. So you would actually say to some people, "We're having a family meeting on Tuesday, but we'd rather you don't come." You might say that to someone,
Um,
or just not
and
invite them.
again, like this isn't really, well, it's more like doing this sort of remotely and coaching. The last case that I worked on where I did this, I knew the person's mom and dad weren't emotionally in a place where they could manage this, and that they were really reactive. I learned enough from the people involved who knew she definitely needed help to know not to get them in the loop. So
Okay. Yeah.
the other thing I try to do is, let's not have everybody talk about this all the time. We need to keep a lid on this
Okay.
and work together and communicate unilaterally.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think I've never really gotten to a point where I've told someone I'm not going to involve you, but I think
Yeah.
usually that doesn't need to happen. You know, like
They probably wouldn't come anyway. They would
right,
just kind of
right.
uninvite themselves. Yeah.
Well, and they
Yeah.
might undermine it if they know about it. That's the thing. If
Yeah.
they're not an ally in the situation, then they could very well blow it up.
Right. Yeah. So there is some strategy to it. I mean, there's absolutely every situation is unique. Not every situation that you're dealing with, for everyone watching, not everyone's situation needs an intervention or needs an interventionist. Um, so some get to this point. Some are elevated where this person is causing some severe destruction to themselves, maybe to their children, to people around them, where intervention absolutely needs to happen. So I think that's just important to remember. Talking about intervention, some families have reached out to me and said we want to do an intervention, and then like hearing the story, I'm like, I just don't feel like this is appropriate at this point, um, given this situation. Given this situation, every situation is different.
Well, it's become such a cultural phenomenon. I mean, I think the inclination that we need help is a good one, you know, because that's one thing
Yeah,
I
big time.
one thing I will say is that, you know, there's so much shame around this illness that, you know, family members don't want to talk about it. So then they're reluctant to talk to their supports. They're reluctant to ask for help. They try to figure it out on their own. And if you do that for a few years, a lot of times it makes it all that more difficult to address it when you're actually ready to. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because you've established a routine of setting limits that you don't keep, you know, giving, you know, threatening consequences that don't stick, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And the addict or alcoholic manipulating you to get to wiggle out of the you know, whatever heat they're in at the time, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I think it's definitely better to pursue some sort of help, even if it's just a conversation, at your first notion that there might be a problem, rather than waiting until it's so apparent that there's a problem that everything's falling apart unless we do something now, right?
Right. Right. Try to deal with it earlier on
Mm-hmm.
than get it way when now that it's
Yeah.
the
Well,
more ill starting to
and that
come.
impulse to not talk about it is what will keep the family ill, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
That's so
So
good.
shining
There's
light on it is huge.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable, but that's where breakthrough happens, and that's where advancement and moving forward happens. Is shining a light in the dark places, the things we don't like to talk about. It's
Absolutely.
exactly what we got to do. Tom, there's a question in the chat from Susan, and maybe you've got some ideas around this. What if the addict doesn't have insurance and the family doesn't have the funds to get them into treatment? What would you advise a family to do then? Is that something that you've worked with before, or do
Well, I
you?
mean, it is the dilemma, especially in the United States, because one of the things that's really sad is that really good care for addiction is it's sort of a story of the haves and the have-nots in the United States. You know, so the people who can pay cash and have the money to send someone to a top tier facility, they're fine. But someone who's completely insurance dependent, you know, they're limited to what facilities are in network, or you know, what kind of insurance coverage that they're going to get. And usually the facilities in the states that accept insurance, in order to do that, they have to accept a lower reimbursement rate from the insurance provider than they would get for cash. And then they get volume of clients because they're in network with the provider, which, you know, makes them less profitable, which means there's going to be less staff, fewer resources. I mean,
Sure, sure.
it's really sad. And personally, you know, coming from a big family with a modest, you know, background, I just, you know, God wanted me to be sober. And
Hmm.
somehow I ended up in a world class treatment facility with a little bit of cash and a little bit of health insurance. And ended up, they saw how motivated I was. There was this, you know, they awarded me a partial scholarship. And, you know,
Hmm.
and so that's
Wow.
part of the reason why I've taken it really seriously, that, you know, I need to help people. I need to give back. That's part
To
of
give
why.
back.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And I wish there was a clear answer, but one thing I will say is there's always AA and NA. And there's still lots of people who get clean and sober there without ever going to treatment.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and and we need to remember that. So yes, AA, NA, CA,
Mm.
GA, SA.
Right.
There's all these. It's not as Alcoholics Anonymous, of course. There's a 12-step program for all of these, whether it's a process or a
Mm.
substance addiction. I know in our town there are free. Just to speak to this again, for people who don't have funds, there are ways around it. Tom talked about he got a scholarship, and that partly helped pay for that. No, at the inpatient addiction treatment center that I used to work at, there was what we call funded beds where I'm from, where the government funds. There was always a piece that you had to pay out of pocket, but and that was funded whether that was for detox or for the 42-day program at that time. And the government funded, provincially government funded counseling. I think in the town community that I'm in, you can have 5 or 6 sessions, up to 5 or 6 sessions for no charge. So those are just some examples that there are resources out there. And in the 12-step programs, one thing that's encouraged is that everyone gets a sponsor. And if you're not familiar with what a sponsor is it's kind of just someone who's a mentor, someone who's further along. They ideally got, you're going to get different opinions on this, but 1 year, 5 years of sobriety. But the point is, they're much further along than me, and I'm going to ask that I connect with that man. It's encouraged to stay gender specific. I'm going to connect with that man and say, "Will you be my sponsor?" And he'll connect with me, and we'll talk one on one. And it's another level of accountability and encouragement that can help keep me clean and sober. So there are options to help somebody. Um,
Well,
and
and there are publicly funded facilities in the United States too, which are worth pursuing in a lot of cases, but there's usually a waiting list, and probably a good general recommendation for families is, if nothing else, connect them with a therapist in the community who's well versed in addiction. But that part's really important because a lot of therapists don't even want to fool with people who suffer with an addiction.
right, absolutely. Well, let me see. Is there anything else to add to that, Tom, or anything I'm missing with that? Because I know that's a big barrier to treatment. Is I gotta how I can't afford it. So what do I do?
Yeah, no, I mean, I wish I had a magic wand and could, um,
Exactly.
yeah,
So switching gears again. You mentioned that you're a father, and it was one thing that really changed your life. It changed you and impacted you and kind of made you think about your recovery as well. I think you said um, a question, a common question is, or a faulty belief in parents is, what did I do wrong to cause my kid to become addicted? I must have done something. It's got to be partly my fault. So I think looking at it from the other side of you raising a son, or I'm assuming it's a son.
yes,
Sorry.
yes.
Okay. Raising your son. Do you think that there's things you can do that can cause him to not become addicted?
Well,
Influence you can have, environment that you can have. How does a parent nurture that? How do we? That kind of brings up the debate about, or the discussion around how does a person become addicted, nature versus nurture.
mm,
So what can a parent do? How do we create an environment in our homes if it's even possible?
well, the most important thing always is to model healthy behavior, you know, and because that, the actions always speak louder than words. But what I've really tried to focus on, what I realized about myself was, I wasn't emotionally grounded. I couldn't connect with my dad. I felt like I couldn't talk to him. I
Mm,
was really confused emotionally. And, I watched a lot of guys in my young adulthood who had relatively minor relationship issues and were really, really sad, but because they didn't know how to manage their emotional experience, ended up committing suicide.
Mm.
You know, and so for me, what has always been most important when it comes to this with my son is to make sure that he's emotionally literate, that he
Mm.
knows how to talk about his feelings. He knows he has self-esteem. He knows about boundaries. He knows these things, you know.
Yeah.
So and also one of the things my mom said to me a long time ago is that, love goes an awful long way.
Mm.
And there are times when he's come to me when he's been very, very ashamed about something that he did, but he's being honest with me about what he did wrong. And I tell him I'm proud of him and that I love him, you know? I mean, I say that a lot. And I think that's important. And another thing I will say is that a lot of parents, because they want to provide something better for their kids than they had themselves, end up sacrificing time with their kids in the interest of work to go make the money
Mm.
so they can have the house and the car and the this and the that. And those young guys, they end up in my groups,
Mm.
and what they missed was the time and the connection. And suddenly they're 20 some years old and they have an addiction and they can't even talk to their mom and dad, you know. So I have always chosen time with my son over money.
Wow. So good. Connection comes back to connection.
Mm.
When we have connection, we're more like, I like your term, emotionally literate. Emotionally literate. How do we get that? It comes
Well,
from
then
childhood,
that requires
right?
we become emotionally literate ourselves first,
Mm.
so
Yeah. So good. So thank you. I'm just going to see if there's any other. I'm going to have a look at any other questions here. Can you talk to someone who's in early addiction? Do you? I think Rose is asking. Can you speak on talking to someone who is in early addiction? Would you treat? Would your language be different to someone who's new in their addiction? I guess is what it sounds like, as opposed to someone who's been using for a long time.
uh well, one of the things that I try to do in general is not use a lot of recovery jargon,
Okay.
and try to really appeal to the human being.
Mm.
And it's funny. I was watching a YouTube video this morning where it was Jordan Peterson commenting on alcoholism. And one of the things he talked about is something that I talk about with clients all the time, which is, you need to have a reason to be sober. What can you get excited about? What do you want for your life? And have, to have something that is an obstacle to the addiction. you know what lights you up. I think the approach is to let the person know you care about them and that you want to see them be happy and have the best life that they absolutely can, and that you want to do what you can to help them do that, and
Hmm.
and just come from a place of love rather than judgment when it comes to the
Yeah.
you know and I do have family members who are clean and sober since who I've been able to help. I have other ones that I've helped multiple times and they're still struggling, and I have one who will probably never stop. So what I've tried to do is, with those people who are really in the thick of it and don't want to change, is to just position myself so that they know they can come to me and that they won't be judged, that I'll treat them with love and respect no matter what.
That's so good. That's so good. To create a safe place.
Yeah.
You can come and you'll be loved and you won't be judged. This is safe. Lots of places in the world aren't safe, and a lot of people are telling me what I need to change or what I need to fix or what I need to solve. Can somebody build me up and encourage me? So if we can be that for someone, that makes us more attractive. That makes us more likely to come to us when they are ready.
Yeah.
And
Well,
the waiting can be so hard.
and I think there's a lot to be said for believing in someone. And one of the things I recognized in very early recovery was that, you know, really the people who really I have the deepest, most enduring love for in my life are the people who believed in me
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
were willing to show it and
Okay.
say it.
So good. And it's not the truth.
Yeah,
But when people say it, when they say, I appreciate you, when they say, I value you, you're important to me, wow, that just makes me more
yeah,
attracted to you. That makes me want to spend time with you. Wow, yeah, can we hang out?
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so
and
good.
I think another thing that I think is important for families to understand about the person having the life that they want. If they're not going to have the life that they want, then why would they stop? If they can't be happy. And so for the family members, a lot of times that's a matter of letting go of your expectations of what is will become of this person. I had a client who lived in a transitional living facility where I worked and did groups for a long time, and I had a lot of interaction with the parents, and this is a kid who almost drank himself to death at 22, 23 years old,
Mm,
and he went away to college to study something that his dad wanted him to study, not something that he wanted to study.
mm-hmm.
And every conversation I had with this dad was about, yeah, but he only has a few credits left to get this accounting degree. And I mean, he brought it up over and over and over again to the
Mm,
point where I said to him, would you rather have a dead accountant or a happy son who works in a music store and plays in a band on the weekends? What do you want? You can't have both.
mm-hmm. It's good. That's good. It's not all about me. It's not
Yeah,
all about dad.
yeah. Well, and
Yeah,
and we can, as parents, we can project our fears onto our kids. That's what that is. If he's an accountant, I know he'll always be able to make a living, and that's going back to what the guy before was saying about us. I'm trying to make myself feel better rather than really help the person, and that's what that is.
yeah. And I think that's such an important distinction. What's my motivation? Is it about me, or is it really about serving and loving?
Hmm.
And I can do both. I can look after me and I can look after you, but sometimes it's all about me. And I'm
Yeah.
trying to manipulate.
Right.
That's essentially what it becomes. Is if I'm doing it out of a place of um, trying to fix you so I can feel better, it's called manipulation. Yeah. So, Tom, we are at the top of our time, and I really want to thank you for being here. This has been incredibly rich. The work you're doing, helping loved ones deal with these incredibly difficult situations is some tough work. So I really thank you for the work that you're doing and way the heck down in Florida.
Well, I feel honored that you asked me, and also I know there are a couple people in the audience who dipped in to see me, and I want to thank them for coming too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you once again, Tom.
All right, John. Thank you.
All the best.
Yeah, you too.
Okay. Everyone else,